Hello, and welcome to Miami Med, the business medicine podcast. It's a weekly podcast, about 30 minutes, and these are very important conversations. And what we're going to cover is things from wealth management, medical advocacy, malpractice insurance, and other business and entrepreneurial resources, especially for physicians who are practicing in Dade County. We want to be a resource, we want to be insightful and informative. My name is Patricia Ares-Romero. I am the president for the Dade County Medical Association. And today our guest is Bob White, Jr. He's a president of the Doctors Company. He is the president of the Doctors Company Group Companies located in Jacksonville, Florida. He's responsible for the operations of TDC Group, all three strategic business units. So I'm sure he is very busy. The Doctors Company is the largest insurer of healthcare providers in the country, insuring over 100,000 healthcare providers. He has 57 years of experience in the insurance industry, has managed the claims and loss prevention departments of several commercial and doctor-owned insurance companies. Before coming to the Doctors Company, in an administrative capacity 21 years ago, he served as president of the insurance operations of FPIC Insurance Group from 2002 to 2011. He has played a role in the legislative process in Florida as an advocate for physicians since 1982, and we're so appreciative of your work. Bob is also the chairman of the board of the Florida Justice Reform Institute, a position he has held since October 2008, a member of the Florida Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors, board member of the Florida Insurance Council, and the list goes on and on and on. He also graduated from San Francisco State University, Magna Cum Laude. Today, Bob and I will be talking about social inflation, nuclear verdicts, and also lead into tort reform. And the need for us to be supported in the grassroots physician movement. Bob, we're so thrilled to have you here today. Thank you for spending this time with us and educating our physicians.
Well, it's an honor and a privilege to talk to you today, Dr. Ares-Romero.
Thank you. So why don't we get into it? What is social inflation, and is this a real thing?
Social inflation found its way into the insurance vocabulary back in 1977. Warren Buffett wrote a letter to his Berkshire Hathaway shareholders trying to explain the phenomenon of an insurance company writing an insurance policy, only to have society and courts tell them that that policy covers things that the insurance company never dreamed of. Okay, so he was trying to explain that losses were much bigger than they thought they'd be because of the way the policy was being interpreted. And the publicly traded CEOs of multi-line insurance companies sort of reached back in time and resurrected that phrase beginning in around 2017 timeframe to try to explain to their shareholders why loss costs were growing faster than was explained by general economic inflation.
Wow.
And that was just a sort of an insurance industry effort to try to explain a phenomenon that sparked a debate, as always, with the front groups for the trial lawyers, the plaintiffs bar, about this isn't a made-up thing, okay? This isn't real. And it prompted a couple of actuaries in 2022 to actually use and apply the techniques of actuarial science to determine that, yes, social inflation exists. It explains why losses grow faster than is explained by general economic inflation. And what they found specifically with respect to medical professional liability was from 2010 to 2019, losses grew somewhere between nationwide 8 to 11% faster than is explained by inflation, and it added 2.4 billion to 3.5 billion to the total losses in medical professional liability. And that was sort of the gold standard for testing this until the Rand Institute came along in July of this year and did what is probably the hallmark study on social inflation. They were social scientists trying to decide whether this phenomenon was real or not. And they looked not just at medical professional liability, but across all lines of insurance. And they published a report called What is the Case for Social Inflation? And the subtitle was Trends in Jury Awards and Claim Payments. And what they found in their study was from 2010 to 2019, there was a 10% increase in the number of lawsuits being filed, while at the same time, claims frequency against insurance companies dropped in every line of insurance except for commercial auto. So insurance companies were seeing fewer claims, but the courts were seeing more lawsuits, okay, which led to the conclusion on their part that people were more willing to file a lawsuit, also be represented by an attorney than ever before in our society. They also found that the plaintiff's win ratio over the period of their study went from 53% of all cases to 64% of all cases, which
That's
meant
huge.
juries were thinking more like the plaintiff than previously. What really causes us concern is that in adjusted inflation jury awards went up 7.6% per year over that study period. So after adjusting for inflation, the
Right.
average jury award went up 7.6% per year for a 10-year period of time. And the other thing they looked at that's troubling to us was they defined a big verdict as anything over $5 million. And they found over the study period that that number was generally around 5.5 to 7.5% of all jury verdicts were $5 million or more. But by the time they got to 2019, $5 million or more jury verdicts now represented 12% of all jury verdicts. So that more or less doubled over the time frame. And they found social inflation is real, okay?
Right.
But as social scientists, they debate whether it's good or bad. Okay, maybe it's good that society is more willing to compensate for loss and pay more money for these losses. And I can understand the societal arguments there, but if you're writing the checks for these losses, or
Yeah.
you're paying the people who are writing the checks for these losses, it can't be good, and it's not good
Right.
from our perspective. So we believe it's real, and it's a problem that needs to be dealt with.
Are there any other factors that contribute to the social inflation that you have been identified maybe in the studies?
It's it's it it's a multifactorial kind of a thing. It has its genesis in the fact that we have become more liberal as a society, that we view the willingness to make a claim when you sustain damage. Our threshold is lower, if you
Okay.
will. Uh, our willingness, and again, the study found to engage a lawyer and file a lawsuit is higher than ever before. Um, we're inundated by billion-dollar lotto raffles, or we're
Right.
reading about CEOs who make tens of millions of dollars a year. We're reading about professional athletes who make hundreds of millions of dollars a year. And so $1 million doesn't mean as much to a young person today as it may have meant to somebody like me who's
Sure.
well past retirement age, okay?
Right.
So uh, our idea of what just compensation is has changed over time. We're subject to lawyer advertising
Lawyer. I was going to say
in
that.
in a way that we've never been subjected to before. They're spending a couple of $1 billion a year uh,
Yeah.
inundating us with advertising, not just to attract a client to a law firm, but to put seeds in the minds of the people who see the ads, who are potential jurors, about what's good and what's bad about our society.
Right. I
And
mean, when I drive up to Jacksonville, I mean, you see the billboards. It's all attorneys, and it's malpractice. It's yeah. And I think social media too, right? I think social media has a lot to do with it.
it has a lot to do with it. There's no question about it. These things go viral. They
Mhm.
put ideas into people's heads, and impressionable ideas in people's heads. Um, we see class action suits more now than we ever have. And we've got this new thing called third-party litigation funding, where we actually have hedge funds investing in the outcome of litigation by
Wow.
funding the actual litigation itself, financing the litigation. And in many cases, they have control over the outcome of the case based on their participation. And it's not just satisfying the injured party or the lawyer, but you also have to satisfy the needs of the third-party funder when you're
Sure.
trying to accomplish the settlement of one of these cases. So
Yeah.
the whole landscape has changed over the course of the last 20 years.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. I mean, I didn't even know about the funding, these hedge funds doing that, because now they need a cut, right, of whatever the verdict is.
The biggest investor in third-party litigation funding gets a return of about 35% per year on their investments.
Wow. That's impressive.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about nuclear verdict. What is it? I mean, and how does this, affect, medical professional liability? I mean, especially for our audience.
Okay.
And
A nuclear verdict is any verdict over $10 million. Okay. We look at them nationwide, and we track them nationwide. In 2010, for example, there were 18 nuclear verdicts in the United States. By 2023, there had been 59. Okay. And that number has, between 2010 and 2023, has gone from something we'd see once or twice a month to now an every week occurrence. And it's frightening. And it's also frightening in the sense that we used to be able to predict where we'd see these. Certainly we'd see them in Florida. We see them in New York, Pennsylvania, and Illinois. The problem for us as an industry is now we're seeing in places we never thought we'd see them: Iowa, Nebraska, Utah, Alabama, places with very conservative people serving as jurors. Now we're seeing those verdicts in states we never thought we'd see them in. In terms of bringing this home to Florida, we had a total of 20 medical professional liability nuclear verdicts in the 10-year period between 2012 and 2021. Okay. In the past 2 years and 10 months, we've seen 15.
Oof.
So we're on a pace. In fact, in 2023, 3 states accounted for 24 of the 59 verdicts, and one of them was Florida. Oddly enough, we had 8 cases here in Florida. Georgia had 8 cases, and Pennsylvania had 8 cases. So between the 3 of us, we accounted for
Yeah.
24 of the 59 cases. To bring it even closer to home for folks in Dade County, the last nuclear verdict in Dade County happened just before the courthouses shut down in January when COVID hit in 2020. That was a $30 million verdict. Before that, in 2019, there were 2 $15 million verdicts. So in terms of nuclear verdicts, Florida is a hot spot for them. In fact, the
Yeah.
Institute for Legal Reform every year puts out per capita numbers for the incidence of nuclear verdicts based on 100,000 of population. And it's across all lines of insurance, not just medical professional liability, but it shows the propensity of a given state to award these kinds of verdicts. And Florida runs 40% higher than the next closest state, which is New York. Okay. So Florida's definitely a hot spot, but as urban areas go, Dade County just is one of the safer havens. It's still subject to them, and they
Sure.
can happen, but they don't happen of the size. Like the biggest verdict in Florida last year was $261 million in a medical professional liability case. The biggest one in Dade County in the last 5 years is that $30 million case I mentioned earlier. So Dade
And,
County,
and
very
yeah.
well.
Yeah. And I have to think that, I mean, how does this affect our premiums? I mean, how does it impact what we have to pay for our malpractice insurance?
Okay. The way it works is only about 7% of cases wind up going to trial. Of all the cases that get presented against physicians, we wind up only taking 7% of them to trial, and we only lose 1% of that 7%. So
Okay.
6 out of 7 cases wind up with a defense verdict. But that 1%, that very small percentage, has an outsized impact on rates. Okay, because the two things we look at closely for rates is the frequency of claims against physicians and the severity of claims against physicians. The severity of claims is impacted by that 1% of verdicts. And what happens is, when a case gets down to talking about settlement, and in Florida, about 35% of all cases have a payment made on behalf of the physician. So in those cases that we're negotiating, the plaintiff lawyer uses those big verdicts that have happened in Florida, and they try to find a case that, in terms of its facts and circumstances, close to the case that they're trying to negotiate, also close in proximity in terms of what county it happened in. So they try to find a big verdict that's like the case we're talking about, where it's going to be tried close to the trial we're about to have if we don't settle the case. And they use that to try to convince us to settle that case. In other words, if you don't pay what I'm asking, here's what can happen to you and your insured if we try this case. Here's a very similar case, and look what the jury did here. Do you really want to subject your doctor to this
To that,
kind of exposure? So it puts
right.
pressure on the insurance company, not only to pay more for each case, but to pay a larger percentage of the cases. And when you're paying more and you're paying more often, that drives up claims severity. There's nothing more volatile than that mix. So what's happened in Florida, and it's actually happened nationwide. If you go back to the year 2000, claims frequency, believe it or not, was 70% higher than it is today. In other words, the number of claims per 100 insured physicians nationwide was 70% higher in 2000 than it is today. In fact, in Florida, in 2000, it was actually higher than the national average. So claims frequency has fallen dramatically, and that
Right.
drop in claims frequency helps keep the pressure on rates that claims severity and these big verdicts have in line. And what happened was that drop in frequency sort of plateaued out in 2016, and severity continued to rise. And so we saw rate increases for Florida physicians from about 2017 to right up around the start of COVID. COVID hits and claims frequency drops again. And claims frequency stayed down and is ameliorating the impact of these big verdicts and larger settlements. So rates are stable for right now. But what we're seeing across the country is an uptick in claims frequency. And we believe it's associated with the fact that plaintiffs' lawyers are seeing these bigger verdicts. They're getting paid more. They're getting paid more often. And as a consequence, they're bringing more cases. So our concern is that the pressure on rates over the course of the next year or so will probably result in rate increases for Florida physicians.
I remember when I first graduated, and the doctor's company was my insurance company since the very beginning, since I first started practicing. And I remember in 2002 to the following year, my premiums doubled. I guess that was a bad year. I mean, and I remember there was, a lot of OBGYNs didn't want to continue to practice. I think that was a time that was very crazy. Well, how does that affect, in Florida, you can go bare without malpractice. And are there any trends or anything that you're seeing with that? And how does
Well,
that affect the entire landscape?
as a percentage of practicing physicians, Florida has more bare doctors than any other state. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Um, what it does is it creates an issue uh, on a number of levels. One of which is plaintiffs lawyers like to find a case with a bare doctor in it because they can convince that bare doctor to help them find liability on other doctors because that doctor wants to protect themselves. Okay, so there's no better witness for the plaintiff than an unpaid medical professional. In other words, every malpractice case has paid expert witnesses, but everybody
Right.
knows they're getting paid and everybody knows how much they're getting paid. Okay. The plaintiff's lawyer finds that bare doctor and gets that bare doctor with a promise from the plaintiff's lawyer that they will go easy on that bare doctor in the litigation if that bare doctor will cooperate with them in presenting the cases against the other doctor. And you can't tell the jury this doctor's bare and this doctor's saying what they're saying because they are
Because
bare and they're cooperating. You can't bring insurance into the courtroom. So one of the things is they co-opt the bare doctor into cooperating with them. And that's a problem for doctors who are trying to defend themselves. Uh,
everything, right?
and we talk to the plaintiffs frequently. Um, they are recognizing that they've created a monster by not pursuing bare doctors in the past. In fact, there was $100 million verdict a few months ago in Palm Beach against a bare OBGYN who did not defend himself. Granted, this was a what we call a default verdict where he defaulted, didn't put on a defense, which means the trial proceeds and the only people the jury hears from are the plaintiff's lawyers, okay, and their witnesses. So this bare doctor now has $100 million judgment against him because the plaintiff's lawyers recognize they've created a monster and they're going to find some bare doctors to make an example of. Politically, the idea of mandatory insurance in Florida is not something that's on the table. So if the legislature won't step up and force all doctors to buy insurance, the plaintiff's lawyers recognize that because of the fact that they've gone easy on bare doctors in the past has created a problem for them, and now they're going to fix it.
Interesting. I mean, I think these are all such important points, right, for practicing physicians. Is there anything else that you think it's important for physicians in practice to know when it
Well,
comes to these issues? Yeah.
yes, we are very, very dead set on trying to get the cap back. Your premiums doubled in 2002 because we needed tort reform. And when we
Yes,
got tort reform in 2003, your premiums went down, probably
they
like
did.
all Florida physicians went down by about 45 to 50%,
Mhm.
because that's what the cap did for Florida physicians until it went away uh, about 13 or 14 years after it was passed. Okay. We went back to the legislature last year and got the Senate to uh, present a bill that had a non-economic damages cap in it. We're going back this year hoping to do the same thing. Last year we failed, and the major reason we failed is every time the cap becomes an issue in front of the legislature, the plaintiff's bar brings in all of these folks, the victims of malpractice, to testify about the bad things that have happened to them at the hands of healthcare providers. And
Right.
the only people arguing against them are the organized medicine and insurance companies through our lobbyists, okay? And what we need are physicians to support us in the effort to enact a cap by going to Tallahassee and presenting their side of the story. This is what happens to us as a consequence of the premiums we have to pay. And while it's been good, the future's not as bright as the past has been, and we need a cap to help us. So we need grassroots physicians to come to Tallahassee to help us. we're a long way from the day when we'll see busloads of pregnant women going to Tallahassee saying, do something, legislature, because I need an
Right.
OB to deliver my baby. We're not to an access to care problem, okay? We don't want an access to care problem to happen because that's not just bad for the patients, that's bad for healthcare providers too. We're trying to
Sure.
deal with this problem before that problem happens.
Right. So that's the plan. So the plan is to go to Tallahassee this year during the legislative session and just kind of get this tort reform in
Yes, in 2025.
2025. Great.
We started the work already to bring the groups together, but the target is for the 2025 legislative session.
Yeah, it's a huge lift, right? Because I'm sure the attorneys are against it as well, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no
Yeah,
question. No
yeah.
question.
Oh my God, goodness. Mr. White, this was so amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all that knowledge and all that information. What happens to most of physicians, they're always working, seeing patients, really, they don't have time to kind of get educated on these subject matters. So having an expert like yourself speak to us today was really wonderful. I really truly appreciate it.
Well, it was my pleasure, and guys like me are out there trying to advocate, but every now and then we need you guys to stand next to us and help tell the story. So that's what our ask is of the healthcare community in Florida for the coming year.
Thank you. And you all heard it. It's important for us to really advocate for ourselves, for our profession, and really help to get this tort reform done. Thank you, Mr. White.
Thank you, Dr. Ares-Romero.